Hello, my name is Kaleb Alway, and today I'll be presenting the work of myself, Blais, and Semih Salihoglu on box covers and domain orderings for beyond worst case join processing. So I'll start with some background on worst case and beyond join algorithms. So throughout this work, we'll study the natural equijoin query Q over an attribute set A of lowercase n attributes and a relation set R of lowercase m relations with capital N input tuples and capital Z output tuples. In the literature, there are many join algorithms that operate directly on the input tuples. These include worst case optimal join algorithms such as leapfrog try-join and generic join. These are algorithms which meet the big O of the AGM bound as their runtime, so which is worst case bound on the output size based on the input size as well as the structure of the query. There's Yanikakis algorithm for acyclic queries, runs in big O of n plus z, often considered the gold standard instance optimality result. You can combine the above to obtain big O of n to the power of the fractional hypertree width of the query plus z. One algorithm which we will focus on in this paper and build upon is called Tetris, which operates on gap boxes instead of input tuples directly. So Tetris takes a box cover B as input and performs geometric resolutions to create new boxes. So in this diagram, we have query Q, R join S. The blue tuples represent tuples that are in the actual relation, so these blue squares. And the boxes, the black rectangles, are gap boxes because they cover tuples which are gaps in the input relations. So a box cover is a set of gap boxes which covers all of the gaps in the input relation for the query. In general, these boxes may overlap, although in this diagram they don't. Tetris's bounds are in terms of the certificate size for the given box cover, which we denote C box B. The certificate is the minimum size subset of B, which covers all gaps in the output space. One of the bounds provided by Tetris is the certificate size of the box cover to the power of W, which is the tree width of Q, plus 1, plus the output size Z. So a certificate for this example consists of the 4 red boxes that are highlighted here. You can see that if you extend these red boxes along the entire output space, so although these 2 boxes in R are defined over only A and B, if you extend them along the entire attribute C to get so that they're defined over the whole output space, then the union of these 4 boxes, if you do that same approach to all of them, actually covers the entire output space, which proves that the output of this query is empty. It's important to note that different box covers yield different certificate sizes. Here we have for the same query, 2 different box covers, B1 and B2. They don't have any boxes in common. And the certificate size we get goes from 4 for B1 to 15 for B2. This motivates our first research question, which is given a query Q where the relations are stored as input tuples. How can we efficiently construct a box cover B for Q such that the certificate size for B is within a tilde O factor of the certificate size for Q, which is the minimum certificate size for any box cover of Q. So this tilde O notation is used to hide logarithmic factors in the input size, as well as the query dependent factors, including the number of relations and the number of attributes in the query. This same notation is used for all of the bounds provided by the Tetris paper. So it's also important to note that the ordering of the domains of the input has a large effect on the box cover and certificate size. So these top 3 relations form a query Q, R join S join T. And you can notice that each input relation is sort of formed in a checkerboard-like pattern. And in this example, any box cover and any certificate is actually going to be approximately equal to the input size. So we have, that's about as large as box covers and certificates can get. However, if we reorder the domains of these attributes and place the even valued columns all adjacent to one another and the odd valued columns adjacent to one another, and same with the rows, we actually get this second query Q prime, R prime join S prime join T prime, which has a box cover and a certificate size of just 6 for the whole query. So that's a great improvement. This motivates our second research question, which is given a query Q, can we efficiently compute a domain ordering sigma for the attributes in the attribute set A, such that the certificate size of the permuted query, which we denote C box sigma Q, is minimized? So revisiting our first research question, when we want to generate a good box cover for a fixed domain ordering, the first observation we can make is that the set of all maximal gap boxes forms a box cover with a certificate of minimum size. So one natural approach might be to simply generate all maximal gap boxes. The problem with this approach is that there are too many maximal gap boxes to generate in tilde-O of the input size time. So this diagram quickly illustrates why that's the case. So we have a very simple input relation here with just 8 tuples. You can observe that each of these T points, in particular T2 is sort of the focus of the diagram, is contained in a maximal gap box with each of these S points. And so there are input size over 2 S points, input size over 2 T points. So we end up with the input size squared number of maximal gap boxes, at least in this input relation. So to get around this problem, one idea is to generate only all maximal dyadic gap boxes for Q. So dyadic boxes are a restricted type of box, which are defined by a single binary prefix for each attribute. The use of dyadic boxes is necessary for our results as well as Tetris's results. I won't go into the technical details as to why that is, but it is the case. So this idea motivates our first algorithm, which we call GAMB. What it does is it iterates over each relation in the input and for each tuple in the relation R, and each dyadic box BT that contains T, we'll have BT along each attribute A to obtain a box BA, which we can see in the diagram. These BA boxes get added to a working set of possible gap boxes. The BT red boxes get added to a working set of non-gap boxes because they contain at least one tuple T. And then at the end, the non-gap boxes are subtracted from the set of possible gap boxes, and what we're left with is a box cover for the input. We can then prove that each maximal dyadic gap box in R is one of these BA for some combination of T, BT, and A. This yields our first main result, which is that GAMB generates all maximal dyadic gap boxes in tilde-O of n time. One interpretation of this result is that in tilde-O of n time, a system can generate a globally good box cover index for a database. We'll now define the following new domain ordering problems. So let the domain ordering certificate minimization problem be the problem of computing a domain ordering sigma such that C box sigma Q, the certificate size of the permuted query, is minimized. And let the domain ordering box minimization problem be the problem of computing a domain ordering sigma such that K box sigma Q, which is the box cover size of the permuted query, is minimized. Our second main result is that both of these problems are NP hard. This is proven via a reduction from a problem called 2 consecutive block minimization. This is a problem which involves minimizing the number of consecutive blocks of 1 cells in the rows of a Boolean matrix by reordering the columns. This problem is known to be NP hard. The full reduction has 6 technical steps, which can be found in our paper. So although this box minimization problem is NP hard, there are instances that are easy to solve. For example, if the minimum box cover size is 1, we can observe that there are only 2 types of rows and columns in this 2D example, just those that intersect B and those that don't. And if we order the domains by grouping rows and columns by their type, whether they intersect B or not, we actually we get a domain ordering that recovers the minimum box cover size for the query. So that size is 1 here. We want to generalize this approach to any number of relations and any number of attributes. So we'll use a couple of definitions to do that. If A1 through AN are the attributes of the query, let AI be one of these attributes and let V be in the domain of AI. And the AI hyperplane defined by V is the relation obtained by selecting from R all of the tuples whose AI values are equal to V, and then projecting down onto the remainder of the attributes excluding AI. Now we also define a notion of equivalence for domain values and attributes. So if V1 and V2 are in the domain of A, we call them equivalent in the query overall if their A hyperplanes are equal for all relations in the query. So given these definitions, we can bound the number of equivalence classes in the domain of each attribute of the query. So let sigma be a domain ordering for Q, let A be an attribute in the query, and then we can bound the number of equivalence classes in the domain of A by 2 times the minimum box cover size of the permuted query plus 1. The way we obtain this bound is by observing that for any 2 adjacent non-equivalent hyperplanes, the boundary of some box in the box cover must lie on the boundary between those 2 adjacent and non-equivalent hyperplanes. So in this example, you can see, for example, H1 and H2 are not equivalent, but they do indeed have the boundary of the box B2 lying on their boundary and B1 as well, and so on. So our second algorithm, Adora, applies this lemma to generate what we consider a good domain ordering. So Adora iterates over each first iterates over each attribute A in the query, and then over each relation R with A in its attribute set, and groups it into equivalence classes. So on the left-hand side of this diagram, we are partitioning the domain of A2, the attribute A2, into partitions that are all equivalent in this relation R. The next iteration, we partition each equivalence class further. So the relation S also has the attribute A2. So each partition gets subpartitioned with these red lines into subpartitions that are equivalent in both R and S. The end result is partitions that are equivalent in the entire query. So by grouping equivalent domain values, we've essentially divided R, each relation R, into a certain number of grid cells. And so if K box is the minimum box cover size for Q under any ordering, then the number of grid cells we generate is bounded by 2 times K box plus 1 to the power of NR, where NR is the arity of R. And this is tilde of K box to the power of NR. We then place a gap box in each empty grid cell to obtain a box cover. So that's what the boxes B1 through B7 represent in this diagram. And this whole process runs in tilde of N, the input size, plus K box to the power of NR time. So this yields our third main result. So Adora returns an ordering sigma for Q, such that K box of sigma Q, the permuted query, is tilde of K box to the power of R, where R is the maximum arity of a relation in Q. And this runs in tilde of N plus K box to the power of R time. So our last algorithm, Tetris reordered, combines our results to obtain new end-to-end joint processing bounds. What it does is it first calls Adora on the input query Q to obtain an ordering sigma. It calls Gamb on sigma Q, the permuted query, to obtain a box cover B. It calls Tetris on B to obtain a join result J, and then returns J after applying the inverse of the domain ordering to transform the input back to its original domain. Sorry, the output back to its original domain. And the combined result we get from this algorithm is that Tetris reorder computes Q in a time bounded by tilde O of N, the input size, plus K box, the minimum box cover size under any ordering, to the power of R, the maximum arity of a relation in Q, times W plus 1. W is the tree width. All of that plus Z, the output size. Now, by applying a different bound from Tetris, we get the second bound where the W plus 1 factor in the exponent is replaced by N over 2, where N is the number of attributes in the query. So for some infinite classes of inputs, these are exponentially smaller than Tetris's bounds. But it's important to note that for some inputs, they can also be larger. So they are not smaller for all inputs. Our work leaves several important questions open. The first of which is, can the domain ordering certificate minimization problem be approximated directly? In our work, we approximated the box minimization problem and used that as an upper bound on the certificate size. This problem appears to be hard because even when the domain ordering is fixed, we do not know of a way to approximate the certificate size without computing the join. It's not known a priori which boxes are relevant to the certificate. But what we do know is that if Q is fully semi-join reduced, then the minimum box cover size of Q is within a tilde O factor of the minimum certificate size for Q. So they're close enough in that case. Another question is, are the dyadic box variants of these problems, these domain ordering problems, NP hard? Our NP hardness result applies only to when the problems are defined over general boxes. And lastly, are these domain ordering problems hard to approximate? We don't know of any hardness of approximation results for them. So these are the references, all of which can be found cited in the paper as well. This concludes my presentation. Thanks.